All right. And do I have permission to share screen?
Yes, you do.
All right.
And I'm going to sink into the background now. Thank you so much for being here. And Vishma wants to know, do we get this presentation after it finishes?
Yes, but I probably have to clean up a lot because I was doing a lot of it last night. Because if I didn't have the last minute, I would have no minutes at all.
Okay. And we're definitely going to record this as well.
All right.
I'm going to be quiet and get out your time.
Okay. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to confess straight up that I didn't know who would be here and what we would be doing. So I think you all may already know just about everything in my presentation. So if Daniela permits, maybe you could download and remix if you want to use it for your own teachers, or you could just take this as an opportunity to throw comments in the chat and say, yeah, I do that. So I'm going to talk about TESOL good practices, not TESOL best practices, because I think best practices for one school might not be best practices for another school. Best practices for one class might not be best practices for another class. So I want you all to come in and think about what's my context, how does my context affect my practice, and what are my students' contexts, and where do they fall into this whole scheme of, this is my awesome library, these are my awesome people, how can I make all this work? All right. I hope you're actually seeing a screen.
We see you right now, but not your screen yet, but you do have the ability to share.
Okay, I thought I shared, but apparently I did not.
You all aren't looking
Try
at
that again. Right? Okay. Okay, now you might see a screen. Excellent. So just to start out, here's where I come from. I didn't know there was a term for this, but one of my colleagues that I'm doing research with told me we're using the appreciative inquiry framework. So that's where I come from. Other people are really good at figuring out, this is what's broken, this is how it's broken, but my focus is more like, this is what's working, and let's focus on what's good, because I am one of those people that I'm like, I just want to see the positive side, and you're going to tell me a negative, and it's going to depress me all day. So this thing came from Twitter, but basically there's the old appreciative inquiry where we were all like, when we ask a question, we can change the world. And now there's new appreciative inquiry, which is more inclusive and actually recognizes the fact that we are working in a community. We are not working alone. So where do I come from? My research expertise tends to be in immigrant communities. I dabble in vernacular literacy. I didn't come up with it. That was Barton and Hamilton working from Shirley Bryce Heath. We stand on the shoulders of giants, etc. And every so often, I take a deep dive into quantitative data when I have a lot of time to think about things, but I don't always have a lot of time to think about things, so it doesn't always happen. And that reminds me that I wrote an article, and you, Dr. Krashen, sent me an email that had a question in it, and it frightened me so much because I would have to deeply think about things that I have not responded to you, but someday I will respond to you. So I come from appreciative inquiry, and I think that works really well with culturally sustaining and culturally relevant pedagogy. So you all are experts. I don't need to tell you this, but what we need to think about our schools being is valuing community languages and understanding that, hey, you use a language and that is awesome. I love that. And I use a language and that's awesome. I love that too. And we are both members of the community together. We need to actually be talking to our communities. Many of you mentioned this from your breakout sessions, that it's not just us. You know, we don't get our students in isolation and we live in isolation. We live in communities. We need to connect our curriculum to our cultural histories. I realize that this is a little bit trickier in those states, like my home state of Arizona, where they say, oh yeah, that's critical race theory. Like, no, that's history, dude. It's what we do. And we need to allow our students to sustain their practices while we support them in getting access to the dominant culture, because that gives them more skills. And I think maybe it was somebody here, or maybe I read it, said yesterday, I don't remember. It was, everything in my head is a blur now. I want my students to be better than I am. I want my students to be stronger than I am. I want to go out and say to myself, yeah, my world was okay, but my students' world, man, they're going to do a great job. Okay, so I'm just going to start with a little bit of basic stuff, and possibly you all already know this, and this is the part that you like remix and give to your librarians and your teachers. So we've got basic interpersonal communicative skills, and we've got our cognitive academic language proficiency. One of these, and we saw Dr. Crashen demonstrate that this morning, one of these is cognitively undemanding, and it's context embedded. When he pointed out his two eyes, I understood. It was easy. And then we have things like writing a standardized test, writing an essay. Context is reduced, it's cognitively demanding. It calls on more of our students' skills and executive function, and that immediately is going to throw up some barriers and make things harder to understand. And I was thinking about this in terms of our Zoom instruction that we've all had to do over the past 2 years. I'm thinking, well, like, where does that Zoom instruction fall into this set of quadrants? So that is some background knowledge. And then a little bit more, which you probably also already know. Another shout out to Jim Cummins, who came up with the iceberg theory that says basically what you can't see me, maybe you can see me doing my little pointy cursor arrow. Like, you can see what people know, what they can express, but there's a whole lot of cognitive academic language proficiency that you can't see in language 1, in language 2, or language 3, or language 4. And underlying both of those is cognitive underlying proficiency. I always get the acronyms mixed up. And our jobs as teachers, librarians, is we want to build that cognitive underlying proficiency so that our students know so that they have background knowledge that they can call upon. And maybe they don't know the right words in L2 or the right words in L1, but they know the concepts, and that is a matter of just learning the right words. And the beauty of this is that we can grow our cognitive underlying proficiency in any language the student understands, which goes back to the input hypothesis. Is your students, if they understand, can actually build their knowledge. We did not relearn what an eye was when Dr. Crashen told us these are my two eyes. we knew what an I was. We just applied that language structure to our cognitive underlying proficiency. All right, so where I come in is literacy practices and literacy products, although there's like a little line there that makes everything look very awkward in the slide. Literacy is a social practice. We learn, most of us, I mean, you hear stories about the person who taught themselves to learn by looking at books and without any input, but most of us learn to read and write as a communicative skill, and communication happens in communities. So I've looked at vernacular literacy as opposed to dominant literacy. Vernacular literacy is that literacy that's used for informal, non-schooling purposes. This is like, you know, I make a grocery list because I want to not buy cookies and ice cream every time I go to the grocery store. I pay my bills after. And I realize that you all are like, oh my goodness, so old fashioned. I write a check. Sometimes I actually do the bank thing, but mostly I write a check. I don't want the banks in my money. I don't want my bills in my money. So those would be literacy products. What I produce a check that pays a bill. And your dominant literacy is more your work or school based. So I teach my students how to write awesome essays. Will they do this in their life as a school librarian? Probably not ever. Maybe like if they publish an article. So I know that you mentioned, hey, we have our students do book talk. That's something that you could do in your life. So that's like kind of where we get the gray area between dominant literacy and vernacular literacy. I know a lot of people who do book talk as like, this is great. I love this. I want to share this with other people. So there are gray area. Nothing is ever black and white. It was, as we were saying, there's a lot of gray areas in the world, but these are just labels we attach to things to help us figure these things out. So more about vernacular literacy. When you're in school, you get a lot of instruction like, okay, now you have to put your thesis statement first, and then in the rest of the paragraph, you support it. But vernacular literacy is not direct instruction. It is more like an apprentice-like role. I remember when I was a little kid, I would sit with my mom and we would go through recipes together, and we would look at grandma's handwritten recipe and we would say, okay, now how are we going to make this? Do we want to alter it? One of my examples is like learning from the community. Another example of when I was a kid, my best friend and I in elementary school created a code. It was not a very complex code. It was just a letter substitution code, but it was a thing we did, a thing that you learn from your community, for better or for worse, might be how to post graffiti and where to post graffiti and what's acceptable for graffiti, or how to read bumper stickers for something less controversial. So students, families, and their communities bring context to the literacy practices they have, and they provide some scaffolding as to how these things happen. And I am going to, okay, maybe it's going to be harder than I think. I am going to provide you with a wonderful article that is available through the goodness and mercy of the Educational Resource Information Clearinghouse, Eric. Okay, maybe I'm not going to do this until I figure out how to, there we go. So this author, who I always want to call Ward and I always want to call Tara, but she actually has a different first name, talked about the invisible literacies of transnational newcomer youth in a secondary classroom. And she went around and looked at, well, like, here's what our school building shows. Does this reflect our students' cultures? How can we make it reflect our students' cultures? Here are the books we have. Does it reflect what our students need? How can we make it? So I love this article. I highly recommend it. Maybe not right now because I don't know. You could read it right now if you wanted to. It's that good. Okay, and now I'm going to get back to this, which means that chat is going to disappear from my screen again. Okay, so children don't exist in a vacuum, just as teachers don't exist in a vacuum. They have families, they have backgrounds, they have experiences, and the more you know about those experiences, the better prepared you're going to be to meet their needs. So I'm going to recommend doing some detective work. And maybe some of you are like me, probably not, because I've noticed that most of my school librarian students are much braver than I am. But I'm a very shy person, and I hate to actually have to go out and talk to people. So my very first bit of detective work was doing a community analysis. And my goal here was, oh, well, what resources does my community have? What resources do they have access to? How walkable and how nice is their area? So this example is super basic, super hands-off. I went into the Census Bureau, and this was like a very long time ago when the census didn't have all the cool tools it has now. And I overlaid some maps and census demographics with public library branches. This is two different libraries in the metropolitan Phoenix area. One was heavily Latino, the other was heavily non-Latino. And I just looked at, well, what do they have that we don't? What do they have different in these two different communities? So that was back in the bad old days. You can totally do this with the Census Bureau without even getting into ArcGIS. It is a beautiful thing. We have lots of tools available where you could look at your community and do even more work. Okay, so then I got a little bit more hands-on, and it was like 4 years later at that point. So I did community walkarounds in the greater Kansas City metro area to figure out how communities engaged in vernacular literacy practices. So you can see here some examples both of the way people are using literacy to meet their needs and the way they're using multimodality and graphics, photos, artifacts, etc. This top left picture, I had to put my hand out to figure which one it was, is from a display of ofrendas at a cultural center. These are they were celebrating Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead. And a person had put this together with little baby dolls and little foods and a little Barney, because that's like how we do it. This is an example of graffiti in Kansas City, in the Kansas City metro area. And some people might look at this and say, oh, it's just graffiti, but that is a freaking work of art. Somebody did an awesome job here. And it was actually, sanctioned, because you can tell that these things, they wanted the community to feel welcome. And here's just a bulletin board at a local, I think it was a bakery. And you can see that, well, you can see, first of all, that the picture is upside down and backwards. So sorry about that. That, there's people like, hey, I'm selling dogs and I've got this thing if you're interested. So it's a way of exchanging services and goods. These are things that your family might see you do at home, but not necessarily have schooling to approach this. So then my most hands-on project yet was actually it was pre-pandemic. I went out and I interviewed people, Midwestern Latinx people who were all over the Midwest, because I did not want to get into a long drawn out situation with our institutional research board. I interviewed adults and I said, yeah, my criteria is you must be over 18, because I would rather not ever have to have that awkward conversation where I'm like, so I actually need to talk to your parents now. I can't interview you until your parents are here. I interviewed adults, but most of these were parents of school-age children. And I asked them, it was a project about information and communication technology use. I asked, so what do you do? What do you use? How do you find things out? And these answers are at least 5 years old, so don't go assuming that, hey, I can post things on Facebook and people will still see them. But this has implications for knowing how to communicate with parents and knowing what they do. I mean, you can see that parents said, yeah, I use translation apps all the time because the school sends out text in English. And I'm like, I don't know. I want to know what that means. I want to know every word. So there is that. And that leads me to my next point, which is bringing parents and caregivers into your practice. And of course, you all already mentioned this in your breakout room. So thank you, everybody, for just affirming my presentation. When you engage parents and families in communication, you are using your ELL students' funds of knowledge. We learned about that with Judy Marillion in our pre-forum. You are honoring their home culture. You are letting them know that, hey, you have cool stuff to tell us, and we are excited about that. So, and actually, as it would happen, I found this mentioned in a lot of the TESOL literature as a best practice. So there you go. We invite parents and caregivers into the library to give presentations, and this shows respect for their culture, and it reinforces our culturally responsive pedagogy, and it allows you to learn from another person's experience. This is going back to the thing where I said, this is the coolest thing. I have an experience. You have a different experience. I can learn from you and you can learn from me. And it also brings an interpersonal context to a lesson or an experience because, you know, sometimes if you're reading a book, especially if you're reading a textbook, everything is cut and dried and taken out of context, but you can ask somebody, oh, hey, what was it like for you growing up in Nicaragua? What was it like for you when your family decided to move here? But realistically, because let's think realistically, a lot of parents don't have time to come to school or the school library. They're working, they're caring for families, they have other obligations. So if you have the luxury, and not everyone does, this would be a great opportunity to pair with your ELL instructor, if you have one, who may or may not, but sometimes does, visit students' parents at home just to kind of introduce, say, hey, I'm the ELL teacher. I want to welcome you to our community, welcome you to our school. And this would be a great opportunity for you, the librarian, to go in and say, hey, I also want to tell you, we have some fabulous things and I want to know what you think your kid needs. Almost every parent I've spoken to, every immigrant parent I've spoken to, it's been like, school is a very high priority for us. We want our children to succeed. And we want to help our children as much as we can, which leads me to my next point. So this is a lovely quote from a school social worker that I interviewed when I was out there, because I also interviewed, in addition to people, regular people, I interviewed gatekeepers. And this school social worker was one of our gatekeepers. She worked in a small Midwestern town. They have 31 languages in the service population, but they have 3 people to translate, one for Russian, one for Spanish, one for Ukrainian. They had churches with Spanish language services, but they had nothing else for any of the other language populations. And there were people with less prevalent heritage languages. Like there were indigenous Mexican and Central American populations where their first language was their indigenous language. Their second language or sometimes their third language was Spanish, and English was just going to be added on top of that. And she said, you know, when I first started here, the schools would say, oh, the families are not that involved, they don't care. And she wondered, how do you know? Did you ever ask them? Did you ever give them the information in a format they could use? And the other thing she said was, surprise, the deal with Indigenous languages, sometimes you can't write it down because it's just a verbal language. And it may be a verbal language that is dying out because it's just because they don't have a written record. It's the parents teaching the kids, and they are isolated from their community, so they don't have that reinforcement anymore. So this is one of the things that I would like to express in stark and vibrant terms is do what you can to get the message out to your parents, because your parents of immigrant children actually do care a lot that their children succeed. Okay, a best practice. This is actually a library best practice. So the beautiful thing is that academic librarians have to publish to get tenure. So academic librarians troll the TESOL literature, and then they take the TESOL literature and they reframe it for international students who are in the US. And then I go through and I take that and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a great idea. So the academic librarians said, hey, you know what's a great way to do things or to get things done is collaborate with your ELL instructors. So one of the academic librarians papers I read was like, I used to be an ELL instructor. I worked with our ELL instructors. We did a little poll. It was actually, I think, a paper poll, but that's because she wrote it a long time ago, about what's working, what's not, and figuring out what the communication gaps were in our information literacy sessions so we could improve those. And then one of you shared Jamie Campbell Naidu's IASL presentation, and this is all. He also wrote an article that I believe is in School Libraries Worldwide, so it is open access. And he talked about his experience as a school librarian working with sheltered immersion teachers using informational books. But he, in his discussion, he also points out a lot of things like, oh, hey, your informational books provide context and clues and organizers. But he also said, and this is something that I want everyone to take away from this, is that you, the school librarian, are a resource for your ELL instructors and your regular old teachers. You know how to search, you know how to find things. You can find open access stuff. You all know where Stephen Krashen's webpage is. You can find a bunch of stuff written in plain language and not too long so they can read it. So share research articles with your ELL instructors, connect your instructors with professional development opportunities, connect your regular instructors with professional development opportunities. Obviously, we'll be able to connect them all with our toolkit once that gets made. But you can also help them by providing the library as a host space for multicultural programs and providing the library as a safe and friendly ground for engaging in other cultures. So the way I had originally planned this is that there was going to be an interactive segment where I was going to ask you, okay, what are some ways you can learn more about your ELL community? Probably we don't have time for that because I talk a lot about the things that I love. And so if you have ways that you can learn about your ELL community, throw it in chat, knowing all the while that I can't see the chat. So
you do have some time.
Okay.
The presentation was supposed to end at 3:15 and it's 2:49. So if you want to take questions, that's fine. Ed, it's up to you.
Yeah, you know what? I think I will just pause here for a moment and say, if you have some ideas that you haven't already put in your breakout room Google board, throw them in here, but there were a lot of ideas shared in the breakout room. So I'm just gonna move on to the next slide, pardon me. So one of the things that, if we go back to that Bix and Calc framework and the 4 quadrants, one of the things that we can do, and this is a best practice as included in the library literature for academic librarians, is to actually reduce ELL students' cognitive load. We want to build their underlying cognitive proficiency. That's not going to happen if you're stressed out about what to say, or like, oh man, this is what happens to me when I do Spanish. I know the rule about how to say that. Now, how do I apply the rule? And so minutes will go by while they're thinking she doesn't understand what I'm saying. So a bit of advice that is commonly given to ELL teachers, but that our academic librarians also recommend, is to define language learning objectives in your lesson as well as content learning objectives. And I am going to share a website, not that website. Okay, now I'm going to share a website for a project that I am involved in, which is, I don't remember what it stands for, but our basic goal is producing more, our basic goal is producing more ELL educators in the state of Missouri, because we now have that requirement that you must actually know how to teach your ELL students, because we've got so many of them. So if you go to that page, you will see a couple of great resources. One of them is a lesson plan that is all drawn out. It's for a Spanish-English dual immersion kindergarten, and it's teaching about tornadoes. You might not come from an area where tornadoes are common. I did not come from an area where tornadoes were common. But yeah, you're in Missouri now, you need to know about tornadoes. So there are some, okay, now how are we going to make this available in multiple languages? How are we going to figure out like what students need to say? What are the standards of, like, I can tell that you know this, but you can't express it. I can tell that you can express it. You're clearly a master. They also have like a template if you want to use that and think about like, how do we make this work in LIS instruction? So from there, of course, there's always pre-teaching the vocabulary. So you, the academic librarian who steals all our TESOL resources, can provide a worksheet of words related to information literacy. Or you can ask students, okay, and for the next 5 minutes, you tell me, or you go through and kind of do as much Google research as you can on these words. Tell me what comes up. And we will go through and talk about these words as we're going through. So you all know word walls that help students, it helps reduce students' cognitive loads by giving them someplace they can go and they can look like, oh my gosh, what is that? There's a word, I don't know it. Oh, that's it. Because this is one of the early lessons that we learned. I say we, like I was a part of this, but we learned when very young children are using OPACs, online public access catalogs, they can't automatically come up with their own keywords, but they can pick out words that are related to the concepts they want. So use these as a visual cue. This was this is obviously not from an information literacy example because I was just like Googling pretty pictures last night. But you could, another strategy is the interactive word wall, in which you put the words up and then you assign the students, you go in and you figure out how they group together, what makes things useful for you. You've got some like pictures here that help. And the next slide is this same instructor who wrote this blog post, which you'll have access to when I actually like clean up this slideshow and send it to Daniela. And she said, this is how I do it. I give my student a word journal, or actually I have them do a word journal where they, here's a word, you talk about what it means, maybe do a symbol, a sentence, maybe do a symbol, and we're going to create for you a word journal that you can refer back to, which also kind of documents your learning and your growth. So this serves multiple purposes. All right, so another strategy for reducing ELL's cognitive load is the flipped classroom, because your ELL students are probably going to be like not focusing on every word you say. I always do this. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to slow down. I need to repeat concepts and use different words so that everybody understands. And I need to pause between concepts to have everybody get to that place. I never do that. I try to talk with expression, but I never do that kind of stuff. But if you have the luxury, not everybody does, you can pre-record a lesson on like how to use our computers to find a thing, or how to create a TikTok when you only know Spanish. You can give that to them and they can come to class. You do the classroom activity and they're better prepared to participate. So that is an option. I'm not sure how feasible it is in the schools when you are literally on call like from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. But for your academic libraries, it's a great idea. And if you can find a lesson online, you could just say, here is a lesson. This goes over what we'll be doing. Now we're going to do the same thing and maybe pre-teach some language and kind of guide them through. There are probably many other great ideas that you could do, but that is that. Okay, so thought question that you've all already answered, because we've all participated in the breakout rooms, is how can you reframe your library instruction to reduce cognitive load for your ELL students? What in your context makes this possible, and what in your environment could you use for this? But in the interest of time, now I'll move on to my next concept, which is increasing context for your ELL students. And ways to do this that were mentioned in the academic library literature is bring them a model of a finished paper, show them what it looks like, the format, the pretty font, you've got your name up here, you've got the page numbers down here. And where they said was like, if they're required to cite a source, show them what a citation looks like, because that's easier than trying to figure out why, and trying to do this new. And I've got to tell you, even as an English language speaker who's an academic and who does this stuff for a living, I look at Chicago Manual of Style and it makes me cry. Yes. Oh, and thank you, Karen, for pointing out, so access to the internet. And that is one of the areas where knowing your community will help you advocate for what they need. And especially knowing where you can figure out. Our school library here in Columbia did kind of a survey of who actually needs hotspots. So we did not give hotspots to the kids the professors' kids in Columbia who already had internet because we had to teach. We gave hotspots to the kids who were living in lower income neighborhoods, the kids who already had free and reduced lunch, because we had a limited number of hotspots. We didn't want to waste them. But also the other thing that was cool about that is our public library was able to help us with a little bit, not as much as would have been nice. And so our school library coordinator, who controls the whole district, worked with them to find some more hotspots. And I believe she may have shamed Verizon or one of those places into donating some stuff. But it was the pandemic and we were all working together then. So, okay, now I'm off track. I forgot what I was saying. So I'll just switch to the next slide, which is, and this is more of the lady talking about word walls, but I wanted this to talk about models and visuals and realia. We heard last week Mr. G using Google Earth to help students visualize their homes where they came from, where they're currently living. And this provides students context, like, oh yeah, I came from there, I am currently here. Geography, cultural barriers, country barriers, and it shows a respect for them. It shows like, yes, you are a person with an experience, and it is an experience that helps us grow and develop. Now, I don't know when you would ever need to talk about sewing machines in the classroom, but if you were doing like a makerspace and you had a sewing machine and you had all the waivers signed so that if the kids sewed themselves to their project that you were okay, you could actually bring in a sewing machine and say, okay, now we see this diagram. We have some words in, I guess, Spanish and Portuguese. Let's talk about how this all works together. Let's talk about this as a system. The other way, of course, is to help students activate their background knowledge is the famous KWL chart. I realize that those of you who were teachers as professionals, like you're like, yeah, tell me something I didn't learn in third grade. But to me, I was not a teacher. I studied bilingual education as my minor field in my PhD program. And I was just like, holy cow, this is brilliant. I'm going to use this for my classes. And I do, in fact, use this for my graduate students because sometimes it happens to me. Daniela asked me to do this project and I was like, oh my God, what do I know about this? And I'm like, okay, let me go back to my curriculum vitae. What do I know about this? Oh, I already know a lot of stuff. What do I want to share? And hopefully the rest of you all can talk about what you learned. Daniela's talking about smartphones and smartphones as access to the internet, which brings up the other question of equity in the playing field, to which I cite Susan Newman and Donna Solano, who talk about let's actually give our students who are poor more resources because it helps them grow better. All right. And here's like your discussion of your question for your thought, which I'm going to skip because I see that I've been speaking for 43 minutes and I still have one last section to go through. All right. Best practice for ELL instructors is to create a welcoming environment. You wouldn't actually think that needs saying, but apparently it does. So researchers in Massachusetts, they talked about effective schools for ELL instruction, and they looked at 6 best practices, but I'm going to focus on one, and that is school staff actively demonstrate positive attitudes, values, and beliefs about immigrant students and their families. I would hope that anyone in the education profession has positive attitudes and beliefs. I mean, I know grading is hard, and every time I have to grade, it makes me very angry, but these are things that you can do in the library. So academic librarians, when they steal from the TESOL literature and talk about how to apply it to teaching international students, say, you know what, you should consciously show empathy and understanding and interest in students' questions and use active listening, which is all the stuff we learned about in our basic reference class. So being a good librarian, also recognizing that some students communicate in different ways. And this is going to go to my next point. Signage. For the love of heaven, signage, people. And especially signage that validates your students' cultures and their languages. So last week, I believe, and a little bit today, we all said, oh yeah, it's easy to find signage in Spanish. Been there, done that. We have other heritage languages, and that is tough. So there was a resource that I believe is on the list of resources that we collected last week. And then I just typed in library signage languages, and I found a resource from the State Library of New South Wales, Australia, because they are seriously committed to multiculturalism in Australia. And this is another opportunity for you to do, if you have the luxury, and I recognize not everybody does, for you to do some teaching and user experience with your own classes. So they are school library users. This means they probably have opinions on what would be useful about the school library. And that means you are doing user experience and user design on the spot. You could hold a planning session. We could talk about, oh, what do we need here? And then encourage them to create their own signs in their heritage languages, maybe with translations, if that helps in learning word concepts. But that would be a great way. Oh, yes, my Google search word was library signage languages. And I will put the link into the chat, but every time I do that, then I'm always like, oh, where did my window go? Here we are. Okay, maybe I won't do that very effectively. Okay, there we are. So, and this is just like, this was my label from the Denver Public Library. I was always kind of weirded out when people would say, hey, Denice, how are you? And I'm like, I'm an introvert. You are violating lots of barriers. But the hablo español was useful to the people who spoke Spanish. I worked in a very Latina dominant area in Denver, so it worked great. Where was I going? I was going here. Another big challenge that we have in libraries is libraries are stressful places. We've done interviews with college students who are like, I'm overwhelmed by the library. And these are like native English speaking college students. It's kind of scary. I don't know what I'm doing. Library anxiety is a real thing. So we need to reduce the stress as much as we can, because we know that libraries are awesome and we need our students to know that too. So provide your heritage language resources, varieties of formats. We heard just this morning that comics and graphic novels, they provide supports for learners who are trying to learn a language but need context and need to understand more of what's going on rather than just looking at a long page with words. Represent your students' cultures. They are a part of your community and they should know that they matter. If possible, a lot of students, especially, this was research that I did a while ago, and it was basically, if you are a student in poverty, you use the library a lot more than wealthy students do, and you use it because it has things that you don't have at home, like a quiet space where you can study, and maybe a collaborative space where you can work with others. Encourage free choice. If you can't you can't choose your own stuff, there's a lot less motivation. And encourage collaboration. Collaborative learning is a way that students can capitalize on each other's skills and recognize that we are stronger together. And I think this is my last slide. Finally, you need to validate your students, your ELL students, that yes, they are readers. Reading happens in multiple ways. You may be working with students who are like, well, I just play Minecraft. I'm not really a reader. One of the librarians that I worked with in Kansas City said, oh no, those kids are totally readers because they have to actually read the instructions and figure out how to play. And then they have to interpret the instructions to each other to engage in communicative meaning making. So I totally count their Minecraft time toward their school, their summer reading program, because they are working with literacy. When I was in my Fulbright in Honduras, I spent 8 months talking to people, and multiple people said, oh yeah, Honduras, we're not really a reading culture. And I'm like, okay, but I see you reading the newspaper and texting with your friends. And back when I was there, it was just flip phones. Every time I go to the coffee shop, there's newspapers available for people to read. There's the internet cafe. It's always crowded. It's always full. You know, I think you're a reader. You just you're not a book reader. You're a reader of other things. And like I said, even when I talked to Latina students at the University of Arizona, they clearly differentiate, well, there's academic reading, and I do academic reading because I'm forced to, but I do reading at the public library. And then they talked about like culturally responsive books that made them happy. So there are like other forms of reading and writing that go on. You might be tutoring your little sisters and brothers, translating documents for your parents, sending emails and letters to your family, writing journals. There was one study of ELL adolescents who were involved in fan fiction communities. So they had fan fiction blogs. And this could be a great way to get people to, because first you have to understand, and then you have to think about the message you want to communicate. But there are so many ways to encourage people to realize that, yes, you are a reader. And your reading, it may not be dominant literacy, but you are reading. So I think this is my last slide, and oh no, it's not quite my last slide. What are some ways you can make your library and your school more welcoming to your ELL students? Because you might be that lone voice in the wilderness saying, you and your ELL instructor might be the lone voices in the wilderness saying, this place does not seem friendly. I come into the hall and all I see is English, or I come into the classroom and I don't see anything. So finally, my last slide. And I just threw this in because I loved it so much. And it is, bless you, about changing mindsets from what we can't do to what we can do. So think about like, oh, my LL students can't read at grade level. Great. How can you work with them to make sure that they can read? Or if you're like, I don't know what to do, you have allies, you have resources. You can go through and figure out, you can ask people. I remember a long time ago, one of my former colleagues interviewed at our school before we hired her. And she asked us, now, how many of you feel information poor? And you can tell the people who were who were very academic, and the people who were like me, who were raised in more of a funds of knowledge mindset, because everyone's like, oh yeah, I feel academic poor, I don't know everything. And I'm like, I am on a college campus. I can figure out anything that I need to do. If I don't know, I can ask anyone. So we, all of us are particularly blessed and particularly fortunate to be in the positions that we are in. And we need to use our strengths and our privileges to help raise everybody up. And that was my last slide. And I've only been speaking for 55 minutes. So I guess I have 5 minutes for questions and stuff.
Okay.
If you all would like to ask questions, please drop them into the chat box. And Denise, I'll try to help out with that if you need me to.
All right, Todd, I bet you do. And one of the things that I wanted to tell you, because I've been, as I was doing my deep dive into TESOL literature, is like, they're like, oh, and we use this technology, we use that technology. So GLAD training, tell me about it. Make me smarter.
Can I come off mute since I'm already off mute? It's through Orange County. And I forgive me for not remembering the acronyms. I grew up learning that there are too many TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. But it's basically learning the tenets of bilingual education and teaching. Our school went through that. We're also sort of doing WIDA training. But there's my two real questions were, first of all, when you were saying include parents in lessons, I know our school and our building and myself completely agree with that. Do you have suggestions? For example, we can't just say, okay, well, it's Thursday after school, parents, kids, whomever, come on in. We have it, everything has to be approved through the district. So do you have suggestions as to how to maneuver that? I also agree with you with the literacy acquisition inequities wholehearther, and have been working on ways to kind of combat that here in upper North Shore of Illinois, closer to the Wisconsin border, talking to whomever I can, congressmen, representatives, city officials, whomever. If you have suggestions or ideas as to how to further that, I would be all ears or interested in discussing later.
All right, so that is a complex question because, of course, I'm down here in Missouri where I could just wander into a school and say, hi, I'm here to do whatever, and they let me in. It freaked me out the first time I did a school practicum visit, and I'm just like, hi, I'm here to evaluate my student, and they're like, okay, yeah, here's your pass, go ahead. What I'd recommend, and this probably involves a little more planning than perhaps we all have to do, but you might want to work with university extension or other gatekeepers to see if they could get together some sort of planned activity that you could do at the school. And this is just me brainstorming, but there might be other ideas that you could do too. What I found was that, like, talking to individual parents, they're like, yeah, sure, I will totally be there. And then, like, something came up. The the little one got sick, somebody was called out. So what I'm saying is that you can't necessarily count on people being able to plan their lives 3 weeks in advance so you can get district planning. But if you can have some backup people built in, that might help. And probably there are going to be other people out there on this Zoom screen right now with some brilliant ideas.
I would certainly think so and hope so. And one of the things that this may not be right, but it certainly seems right in my mind, is as a male elementary bilingual school librarian, people don't want to listen to me.
Weird.
That's what it seems like.
Yeah. That is one of those areas where I would say, and this is just me, so other people have other opinions, that you need to, I'm not going to say get more shouty, but get more insistent and actually let people know how serious you are. You'll ask, how do you do this? And I'm like, I don't know. I can't get shouty. I put my head down and I keep doing the same thing that I've done and it gets results. And somehow the world changes or I stop being problematic. But I see Jennifer says, you're not alone here. So I'm glad to know that this is not, maybe it's not you being a male elementary school bilingual librarian. Maybe it's you being a librarian. Or maybe it's you being in elementary schools. Oh, Daniela, ooh, you've got some power moves there.
Yes, I think it is more male in an elementary school. I mean, I'm supported in the librarianship. There's no question about that. But there are not a lot of men in elementary, period. And I'm an advocate for my colleagues, for my kids, for my families, and I'm going to support them. Yet there's a fine line between doing all of those things more than I should and not enough, if that makes any sense.
That makes very good sense. And I see that, so Daniela is coming in with all the power moves, like hey, come talk to me, I'm going to talk to you. But the other thing that Jessica pointed out, and I wanted to emphasize this, is that you are a role model to your students when they see you read, and take pride in that, because it's kind of a stereotype that, like, oh, boys don't read. Like, oh, the boys absolutely do read. Maybe they read differently, or maybe they read the same, or maybe they read science fiction and baseball stories. And we, being female librarians, we're like, science fiction and baseball stories? How lame. But that is why we need you out there advocating and you out there making a difference. So I value you, and I think everyone should. And I want you to go out and feel valued.
Well, thank you. It's for one who doesn't accept compliments because there's more to be done. It's sort of that Hamiltonian viewpoint of there's a million things I haven't done. Just you wait. Just you wait. There's too much to get done. So, but plow ahead. You can't see me, but I'm throwing my fist towards the screen, driving forward.
And the other thing is, of course, to build allies outside of your community that can remind you that you're doing good things. Like, all the people here, we are presumably going to be a growing and learning community for each other. So that when times get tough and you're like, they're just not listening, you can come to us, your, oh, there's a word for it and I can't think of it, your community of interest or your safe space group and say, this is happening. And we can say, yeah, we know it happens to us too. We overcome it. This is what we do. Personal learning community. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Daniela, yes, I would very much like to join there was something in here. I gotta scroll. Library advisory board, if that's was a question or if that was an idea.
Are there any more questions?
Yes. I have a question or comment.
Yes, please.
Am I on the air? I guess not.
Yes, you're on.
Oh, okay. I just have a couple of comments related to what Todd said. The last comment relates to something Denise said, where she actually was quoting John Wooden, who was UCLA basketball coach. And I think of this every morning when I can't get out of bed from feeling I can't get everything done. Don't let what you can't do stop you from doing what you can do. I just want to repeat that because it's been helpful to me. I also want to pass along a wonderful idea. And I've just posted this in the chat box. It's a comment. Oh, I got to find it again. Gosh. Well, it's called the STAR method. I'll give credit in a moment. STAR method is one of the great ideas of all time. And I kept thinking about it all through Denise's talk. And in fact, on and off yesterday as well. It's kind of like, so we say in Yiddish, it's called Treppenwerte, words that you think about when you're going down the steps after you've had an argument with someone in their apartment. So these are Treppenwerte. I keep thinking about, oh, now I'm forgetting it. Oh gosh, here we go again. I need more coffee. The STAR method, again. The STAR method, very simple. One of the great ideas. You give the students permission, you encourage them to take their pen or pencil and put a little star in library book inside covers that they liked. That's the whole method. It cost absolutely nothing. Other kids are informed. You get books with 10 stars, 20 stars, 30 stars, and other kids want to read them and talk about them. It cost absolutely nothing. And I suggest we try it out, see how it works. I wrote a journal paper on it showing that people did it very easily and they enjoyed it. The other thing too, when we do the STAR method, we get somewhat more reading, which means, as I said earlier, you get more language, you get more subject matter knowledge, all for free. It all comes. I heard a discussion given by Donald Miller from Fort Worth with middle school teachers, and she asked them, how many of you have the number of kids in your school, there may be 100 teachers there, who are an expert on World War II? And out of the 100 people, maybe 15 raise their hands. Other subjects, other kids know stuff, and they get it from movies, they get it from reading. And with STAR method, we can exploit that. Okay, I feel better that I mentioned those things. I'm done.
That is freaking brilliant.
Isn't it? It's amazing.
Yes. All right. Cool.
All right. It looks like the questions slowed down, but you have some great comments in the chat box. Thank you for inspiring us with all of those ideas and your candid discussion. It's very much appreciated. And I really have some nuggets that I'm going to incorporate into the toolkit now. So thank you, Dr. Adkins, for being here. I knew that you would be perfect for this. Thank you also, Dr. Krashen. So I think that we picked well, and I appreciate you and you taking your time out of your busy schedules to be here. Okay, so I guess it's time for me to move along and start talking to you about what's next. So look, I won't take very much of your time. I'll just show you a couple of things, like just in case you missed it things, all right? And I'm going to stack my screen. I have to shuffle a couple of things around. Okay. So now that we've had these wonderful presentations and these amazing discussions, I want you all to know that we did all of this so that we could collect data. Whether you realize that you were producing it or not, that's what we've been doing. All those questions I asked you, all the surveys that you filled out, they were for data, and I appreciate you doing that. It was a progression of things so that we could get permission from you to understand your needs and your desires and the expertise that you wanted to put into this. So the first step I need to tell you about is payment. So we're going to start working on processing those payments for those of you who hung in with us for this entire process. We started off with 50 some people, and some people just spontaneously dropped out. So thank you for being here. I would have loved to have had a face-to-face meeting with you all, but now we have things like, what's the monkey thing? Monkeypox. I'd never heard of that before. So there's monkeypox, and of course the dreaded COVID that still continues to hang on. So we decided that we weren't going to do that, but we would have brought you here, put you in a hotel, and fed you. But maybe we'll still get to have some type of face-to-face meeting. We'll see. But we'll definitely have some more meetings. Yes, next time. It's better to be safe. Why put yourself in that situation so that you can hurt yourself? So I want you to know that we're going to start updating the real website for the project. There are some things on it, but it's by no means finished, okay? We're going to create a toolkit based off of your suggestions, and we may not get them all in, but we want to get a lot of them in. And after we create this toolkit, we're going to come back and ask for feedback. So the feedback could be in the presentation of the toolkit. We might have some focus groups. Surveys, they get so boring, but maybe we'll have some surveys there too. Because remember, this is still research. It seemed like a very fun form, but it was all grant-based. So now we have to produce. So after we get finished with developing the toolkit and getting that feedback, we're going to revise based off of what you have said, then provide the final toolkit again. So this, when you write the grant, you all know that you go through creating different phases, and you pray that when you get the grant, the phases actually work. I mean, so this is what we're doing. This is actually a 2-year grant, and we haven't even finished the first year. So there's a long time to go, basically to the end of next year in August. So we were supposed to have the forum in May, but we're about 2 weeks late. But now it says June through July, we're going to do some of that initial data analysis. And we have. You guys have been so gracious to us. We have already submitted to a couple of conferences. So we're going to Elise. We're going to ALA. We're doing the EduLearn conference as well. We've already created a paper from some of the things that you said. August through October, we're compiling these things, and we're going to put them in a toolkit and a white paper. I'll be at ALA doing the posters in the diversity section. So look for us there. And also the easels group will be having a presentation, and I'll be presenting part of the findings there as well. So if you're going to be at ALA, please do come by and hear about some of these preliminary results. Yes, in DC, and I'm scared because I do not want COVID, but I'm going to be there. I'll have my mask on too. I'm not ashamed of wearing it. Anyway, so we're doing some of the initial data analysis, August through October, developing that preliminary white paper. Phase 8 starts November through January, evaluation. So we're praying we'll get there. And then after you all give us that feedback, we'll start with the dissemination. Yes, Jennifer, that's right. You have to get those booster shots. Well, maybe you don't want the booster shot. I'm going to stay out of that. It's up to you about what you need to do. Okay, so thank you, Tricia. She wrote me a special note. I appreciate that. I need it. So there's an evaluation survey. I'm going to put that in the chat. And I want to thank you all for hanging in there today with us as we went through this process. I wanted to use EventMobi, but I could not pay them $20,000 to $30,000. So here we are in Zoom. Yes, it pained me greatly to figure out how much it costs. And you know, as you work through things and you're trying to navigate tech, all kinds of crazy things will happen in the process. So please do evaluate the form, and we need to know what to do next time for you, right? Now, please make connections. We have this connection document for everybody. So here you go. If you want to talk to everyone, just go ahead and get into that document, leave your information there. And if you want to be involved, you don't have to, but you can. And I know that you were requesting it. I'll work on setting up a listserv or some type of Facebook group so that you can bounce ideas off of each other. I must say, I'm a very quiet person. I'm not social media lurker. I will study you all day long on social media, but I'm very quiet about conversations. I have like multiple accounts for studying people. Okay, so the presentation documents, if you did a presentation, please add it here. I'll work on getting those onto the regular website, but when we start recording today, hopefully Zoom captured everything and I'll be able to put that recording into the Canvas site. This is the regular project website. She looks a little sketchy right now. Yes, she does. But I'll keep working on her as we go along. Okay, so this is the project website. See, I have her in edit mode. Notice I called her her, but she's in edit mode and we're just gonna keep populating with resources. And so Dr. Zhang has already started and we're just going to add some more that you all have shared. As this toolkit grows. This is not the toolkit, but some resources. Let's see. This is the Canvas website. Now, I know all of you don't want to be there and maybe some of you don't like Canvas, but the question is, what have I done with all these resources? Well, they're actually there, and 22 of you aren't here with us, but maybe you'll decide to join us. So if you go into this Canvas website, very simply, I didn't make it anything complicated because that wasn't my point. Basically for IRB processes, I was not allowed to post to certain things, and I do have to use a UNT website for the grant for archiving purposes. I was compelled to do so by the powers that be. I had to sign paperwork, but maybe you noticed it or maybe you didn't, but these are the preform resources Voila. And here are the forum resources. I already started, but I'm going to put these forum recordings up here if you need to get to it, okay? Or get to them. So that's where you can get right away. I know that it's not the prettiest place, but there it is, because IRB was like, they didn't want to approve anything else. Texas has these strange things going on lately where you have to get all your tech approved and it goes through a long process. So there you have it. Okay. So just so you know, let's see. You can review these group notes if you want to. I hope this is a resource for you. That is so funny, Denise. It's driving me nuts. But with the approval of all the tech stuff, I know it's for the better so that we don't get hacked, but my goodness. I'm just like, y'all are cramping my style. Anyway, here are all the resources for the action plan. You might be able to take some of these and go ahead and implement them, even though they're not in the toolkit yet, but they're there in their most basic form for you. This is the networking sheet, and a lot of you have already been in here. You added your names. Please talk to each other. You can see like where everybody stands and the different things that they do. There's the social media. And if you don't mind, I'll add your social media to a list. I'll probably follow you all too.
Good.
So again, here's the agenda. If you want to go back there, you can still look at it. There's a forum evaluation link, the networking link, the presentation document. And yes, so you all can upload. And yes, Dr. Sawyer, I did see your presentation that was on Canvas. And I'll start putting those extra presentations there as you finish. Some of you are going to do presentations, which we really, really would love to have to put on the project website. It's nice to have people with experience to share what they know. We don't want to read stuff all the time, and it's not being lazy. Some of us just don't learn by consistently reading tons of documents. We have to listen too. So a lot of you said that you had experience with ELs. And if you do, tell us something. Spend 8 minutes at the least telling us something. We would appreciate it. We'll put it on the project website. You did sign a media release, but I will say this, you'll get credit for your work. We're not here to steal anybody's work. We'll analyze it and aggregate it, but your presentation is your presentation. It'll be on this website, but it's your presentation. You get the credit. We don't need to steal. You get all that glory. I also encourage you, if you need to gosh, why do these words leave me? Use a common, what is it? Common something license. Denise, can you remember what it is I'm looking for? Creative Commons license, yes. You can choose Creative Commons licenses to retain ownership of your work. You can decide to use, remix, or whatever, but go to this website and put a license on your work. I encourage you. You don't have to, but I encourage you. So with all that said, I'm so thankful for your I'm so thankful for you taking the time to be here. Again, I can't thank you enough. Even when I messed up that, for some reason it works when I'm supposed to be teaching, but today I just had brain fog. Yes, I admit it.
Me too.
But yeah, through my mess up with the breakout room. Thank you for going back to your breakout rooms. Not one, but 3 times. 3 times is a charm. So please evaluate the form. Please look forward to us talking again later. I would love for you to join the Canvas community, but I'm going to figure out something where you can send messages back and forth, whether it's a Facebook group or a listserv. so that you can ask questions. Can you repost the evaluation form again? Yes. This is the evaluation form link. Thank you so much for doing this. Now, does anybody have any questions before we leave? Vishnu says she would rather have a listserv. Okay. I can do that really easy. I set up one of those recently. I can do a listserv. I suppose I can use it to give you project updates, and then you can unsubscribe at any time. Thank you all so much. Y'all are amazing. And somewhere in the grand scheme of things, I think I might have missed a email or two, and IJ's been really helpful to me. So email us both if you have questions. It doesn't look like you have questions. Y'all are saying thank you. So I hope you enjoyed this. And I'm saying thank you to you again. Okay. This was fun, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Danielle,
Yes.
I was trying to type it in the chat, but I'll just tell you out loud. Go to iherbs.com and order you some wellness formula to carry with you when you're in ALA. I was trying to type it in the chat. I'm gonna type it in the chat. It's these herbs that I get from this company, and it's really good. It's called Wellness Formula.
Okay.
And